Good morning, everybody. This is fabulous. I have to tell you all, I'm so excited. I get excited for about every program because that's the fun of being a program director. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Amy Elliott. I'm the Nonprofits Lead Program Director. And this program has been a particular joy to put together and to watch as people signed up, because Delaney and I and Becky and the ladies that you'll meet from Nonprofit Wellness just kind of put it together as a dream. Like, it was something that we felt would be awesome. And, wouldn't it be cool if? And we could have very easily sat around and talked ourselves out of all the reasons why it wouldn't work, because it was so expensive and long and engaged, and the timing and the virtual and all the different reasons why it would have been possible that this wouldn't have worked. And look at all you that are here today this morning. So I'm really glad that we forged ahead. I'm really glad that we had the great partnership of Delaney and of the United Way Alliance in the Mid Ohio Valley, of Becky and Ethos Leadership, Susan and Taisha from Nonprofit Wellness. There's Susan coming into the room right now. I can't tell you how grateful I am to the partners that helped put this together, and then to all of you for seeing what I hope is the genius in this, and registering and being part of it. Remember that we're here for you. And it's very important that you are getting what you want and need out of the programming. And so if there are things that I can change, adjust, add, take away, do, that's my job. So let me know when you need to give me feedback, even if it's midstream, because I prefer to correct midstream rather than let anything go on too long. I am going to, other than welcome you, I'm going to share my screen for just a second, because I want to acknowledge some folks here. As I said, we had some partners. So we cannot forget, definitely, to thank the United Way Alliance of the Mid Ohio Valley. Like I said, Delaney has been a fantastic thought partner, and just a partner all the way around, and listening and adding value to how we put this program together. I'll let her introduce herself here in a minute, but she has been a wellness coordinator there at the United Way Alliance of the Mid Ohio Valley for 2 years. So what this journey that you are all starting today, she started 2 years ago. And if you probably remember, the last year has been a little weird. And so she has done it through that as well. So when people would ask me, well, what about if our team's virtual, or what about remote, or what about this, and what about that? I'll point you right to Delaney and say she can answer those questions, and she can help you think through things the way she's helped me think through things. The Nonprofits Lead logo that you see, that's me, that's us. We're a collaboratively funded capacity building group out of Marietta College, and I'm the program director. So my job is to make sure that you have what you need to strengthen your nonprofits. And definitely part of strengthening your nonprofit is strengthening your staff of your nonprofit, and making sure that you're all getting fed the rest you need, the togetherness and teamwork that you need, and everything that you need, so that you can continue to fulfill those missions and do that great work that you do, because you're the heroes of this valley, etc. And further. And then Ethos Leadership Group. I think a lot of you who, especially that are local, know Becky, and maybe even her partner, David. They've done programs with us before. And if so, I know you're excited to hear from her, because you know how fabulous she is. And she just as always, just jumped in with both feet and said, that sounds great. Let's do it. And then we have some new partners from Nonprofit Wellness. These ladies are out of the Baltimore, Washington area, but don't let that worry you. Their heart is in the right place. They really align with our vision and with our goals and our values at Nonprofits Lead and for capacity building. And they have started this company and do this for a living. And so we're going to introduce them to you as well. And we're so happy to be in partnership with them. So those are our folks. Let's do some introductions. And I'm going to start with our team. I'm going to start with Becky and with Susan and Delaney. And then I'm going to call on you just around my screen so I can make sure that we get to everyone. Okay. The text info was, hang on. I'm going to share it again real quick because not everybody got it into
I can put it in the chat for you if you want me to.
That for me, Delaney.
Yeah.
Boy, thank you. Fabulous. Okay, so let's start with Becky. Becky, would you introduce yourself to this fabulous group?
Hey, good morning. I think I know several of you. For those that I don't know, I'm honored to get to be part of your wellness journey and get to be part of the launch of your wellness journey in this process. I am an attorney by trade, and I left that business about 12 years ago to become a leadership consultant. I have two wonderful partners in that business, David, that Amy's referenced, and some of you may have met, and our partner, James, who actually founded our company. I have a wonderful husband who is Jeff, and I am blessed to get to spend most of my days with him because I get to work from home. So especially during this time of COVID, it's been a blessing to be able to be home with him as opposed to on the road all the time. And you'll probably learn way more about me than you want to know as we move through presentation. So I will stop and encourage Delaney maybe to go next.
I am Delaney. I'm the Information Referral Specialist at United Way in Parkersburg. Like Amy said, we've been doing a wellness program for about 2 years at the United Way and have seen a big difference that it's made in each individual, but us as a team as well. So I'm super excited to have you guys on this journey so that you guys can put this into play at your workplace as well.
I guess I'll go. My name's Susan Comfort, and my last name is the one I've had for 49 years. I didn't just adopt it when I started doing wellness work. I wanted to, well, you'll learn more about me in the afternoon session that starts at 1. But for now, I just want to make sure everyone is super comfortable and present. So just give a stretch, like right now in your chair, and like give your spine a little bit of like mobility so that you can crick your cracks this morning. And you can even grab the back of your chair and do a little like spinal twist kind of thing. And maybe if we can mute, oh, I don't know, Amy, if you can mute Kirk's with the background noise. Anyway, the other thing is you can like light a candle. I just saw this on my table, so I'm going to do that. You can grab your tea or your water, just like do the things that nourish your senses so that you can stay really present and listen to Becky this morning and, be like massage your feet while you're doing it, or like, doodle something, or, like be fully present, but also take care of yourself and fulfill your needs so that you can absorb all.
Just do a gut check and make sure that everyone can see my screen. Is that, yes, it's working like it's supposed to? Fantastic. I like it when that actually happens. Doesn't always work that way. So we're going to talk today about actually the foundational elements that go into building a culture of wellness. And the reason that we're going to start there is pretty simply this, and it's been expressed a whole bunch of different ways. Daniel Coyle talks about culture as a set of living relationships working toward a shared goal. The key to that, from my seat, experientially, having worked inside a lot of different organizations in myself, and then also in my work as a consultant, is that living relationships part. There has to be freedom and flexibility for people to continue to develop and grow and change. And because of that development and growth and change that occurs in us as individuals, we're going to get changes in our culture. Every team is defined by whoever is a part of that team, which means if someone leaves it, that makes a difference. If someone joins it, it makes a difference. And so we have to be able to think and frame ourselves in like a living organism type of way, which means that we can't have static programming, whether it's wellness or anything else that we would put into play. It can't be static. It has to be able to grow, to change, to develop, to shape, to shift on the basis of the people that are coming into that culture, because that living relationship is critical. Peter Drucker is quoted as saying, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." There are some other people who go on and say, and lunch and dinner and any snacks that somebody might have during the day, that culture eats those things. It also eats programs and activities and all of the things that we may consider doing from a wellness perspective. If the culture isn't actually foundational for a wellness initiative, it will ultimately eat that initiative. And so it's critical for us to start from that perspective. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to unpack today Daniel Coyle's Culture Code book and talk about the 3 foundational elements that are necessary to exist inside of an organization for any program, activity, or other culture to be built on top of it. So for instance, if we want a culture of wellness, we're going to have these foundational elements supporting that culture to ensure that our entire organization is able to continue to buy in, to ensure that that living relationship component allows for growth, for development, for shaping, and for shifting. And so we're actually going to unpack those 3 concepts today. I do want to tell you that this session is about today, which includes shared vulnerability, that willingness to kind of step out and share. So I invite you to consider that today as we talk, as we start to grow and develop our own set of living relationships and how that's going to work inside this little culture of the program that we're working through over the next 6 months. Is it? And this is not a rhetorical question. Head nods will work. Does that sound okay to you? Yeah, okay, perfect. All right, fantastic. So let's go first to unlocking the culture code. We're going to start with this concept of establishing purpose. So I'm going to tell you a couple of stories that are actually built inside Daniel Coyle's book. And for those of you who've read Culture Code, well, let me just ask, has anyone read Culture Code? If I can get a hand raised or a nodding of the head or a thumbs up or something. Okay, so no necessarily any readers yet. That's cool. Then you'll probably want to go buy the book after we talk today. Culture Code ultimately is this. Daniel Coyle and his team of researchers went to high-functioning, high-performing organizations, and they researched what makes them different. What is it about these high-performing, high-functioning, amazing organizations that make them different? What's going on? And what they ultimately found is that whatever culture they were trying to build, and by the way, it was an expansive amount of culture possibilities. Some of them were about a culture of winning. Some of them were about a culture of wellness. Interestingly, they researched, and I'm not sure 100% about the ethics of this, but they researched a crime syndicate. They were about a culture of crime. They were actually jewel thieves and art thieves, but they were an interesting culture because they were very good at what they did. And so they researched all of these cultures and they found these foundational elements underneath. And the first one was that they all had a high purpose. Now, that doesn't mean an ethical purpose. It doesn't mean a purpose we would agree with. It doesn't even mean a purpose that you and I would want to buy into. But it does mean a purpose that the group that formed all agreed matters. Okay, they established purpose. And 2 examples that they gave of high-performing cultures were Johnson & Johnson and California Public Schools. I'm going to unpack the stories for you. So I don't know if you all remember, Anybody remember the Tylenol crisis in 1982? Some of you may be too young for it. I've now reached the age where sometimes my audience members are too young for that kind of thing. It's a little disappointing, but nonetheless, Tylenol crisis in 1982 in the Chicago, Illinois area, there was Tylenol that was tainted and actually killed some people, right? So obviously no concept where that had come from. They had everybody involved in the process of trying to unpack how did this occur? They had the FBI involved, other types of federal initiatives and groups involved. Obviously, the Johnson & Johnson team was trying to figure out what was going on and how it is that their production line had been tampered with, because that's the belief that something along their production line had to be tampered with. And they faced this really critical decision point in the midst of this crisis. Really critical moment where they had to decide as a company, would their recall be a limited recall? Or would their recall be the expanse of everywhere that they sent that product? Big decision point, all right? Think about the implications. And I'm monitoring chat as well, so I would absolutely love to see chat responses to this or people unmuting. If you were a decision maker in that room, in that moment, having to think through, would I only do a more regionalized recall or would I do a national recall? What kinds of things would go through your mind? What would you consider? As it is about sanctity of life for us, for me, I can't decide something that could jeopardize sanctity of life. And then you're going to have crazy people like me in a room who goes, well, the cost benefit analysis of that, I get it, but here's the thing, I'm a lawyer, right? I've been trained to think about loss of life in terms of dollars. And it's a horrible thing to acknowledge, but they teach you that in law school. They teach you to think through the ability to talk to your client and say, yeah, there's a financial risk here, but here's the reality of it. This is probably only going to cost you this much. And if you find that disturbing, please know I don't do that, right? And I never really did as an attorney, but it's what we're taught to think like. Insurance valuation tables do it all the time. It's frightening to consider, but here's the reality. Every life stage has a dollar value. It just does. And we have seen organizations that have been in this exact moment that Johnson & Johnson was, who have decided that the dollar amount mattered more than the potential loss of life. We might not like that, but realistically, that was the culture that they had adopted. They had a shared belief. We may not agree, but they had one. That's how strong culture is. That's how important it is. So what did our friends at Johnson & Johnson do? Well, interestingly, they had just spent in the 9 months prior to this incident, they had just spent 9 months reviewing their credo, their core values, their beliefs, their reasons to exist. They had looked at their mission, they had looked at their vision, and they had looked at their values. Their credo had been written years before. Years, lots of words, years before, and they were just in the normal process of review. And there was a single sentence in their credo that said something like, and we want to be the trusted partners for every provider, doctor, nurse, and every mom and dad who would give our product to their patients or to their children. And because they had spent 9 months talking about and ultimately, interestingly, just affirming what had been written years before, when they sat at the decision table, this is the only thing they discussed. Does this fit inside of our credo? Which decision supports who we say we are? And with basically no hesitation, every single person in the room as a decision maker said, if we want moms and dads and doctors and nurses to trust us, we can't put their patients or their children at risk. We're doing a total recall. And that was in spite of the fact, by the way, that the FBI had told them that they were comfortable on the basis of their investigation thus far with them only doing a regional recall. So they had an outside source saying, it's okay. You don't have to do a full recall. We believe this is contained in this limited place. And Johnson & Johnson said, it's too risky compared to who we are. Purpose. They had purpose. So when you hear that, what immediately pops into your head? What immediately pops into your head about purpose and how important purpose is, and perhaps starting to make the connection between what purpose do we have inside our organization that we can actually build culture of wellness on top of? What do we already believe? What do we already hold to be true? What do we already value that we can actually just put this wellness concept on top of it? Anybody have anything that's immediately sparking in their head? We're going to keep talking about that question, so don't worry if you don't have an immediate thought. But does anybody have something that just immediately pops like, yes, this is something my organization believes in, and it supports? The next story that we'll share from the Culture Code, which is a very different type of story, but a story nonetheless that's valuable and helpful. Robert Rosenthal was a Harvard researcher, and he went to California public schools in a time where they were being analyzed heavily for test scores, right? And so individual classrooms, individual schools, school districts, really high focus on test scores. And he said, hey, guess what? We have an instrument that we can use, an assessment to test your kids in the classroom. And we will be able to tell you without a shadow of a doubt which ones of them have the most potential to progress their test scores. We've created it. We can use it. We can literally create you a prioritized list of kids. Like, these kids have the potential to go up 10 points in test scores. These kids have the potential to go up 5 points in test scores. These kids have the potential to go up 1 point in test scores. And so they're like, great, right? Let's find that out. And so they did. They did this assessment. They did it in several classrooms. They put some parameters around it because it was a research project, and the instructors knew that they needed to be able to save the work that their kids had done and any feedback they had given and all that kind of stuff. So the kids didn't get to go home with papers. It all got recorded and kept in the files. So they went for an entire year. And at the end of that year, they went ahead and did all the testing. And indeed, interestingly, there were great results. Test scores increased in all the classrooms that had this really critical piece of information. Here are the kids who can do the most. I think it's interesting is that they reviewed the work, like kid turned in work, what kinds of stuff did the teacher say, how did they follow up if they didn't do the answer correctly or they did do the answer correctly. And what they discovered is that they could see more imprints, more touches that the teachers had made on the kids who they were told had the highest potential to grow, right? Which, from a logic business choice decision, you're going to go, well, yeah, if this kid can move up 10 points, then I want to give them everything they need to move that 10 points. And so teachers sort of went through that mindset, and they were able to go back and see those different touches. And as you would unfortunately potentially expect, the kids that were kind of grouped into that, they're not really going to advance much. They got very little touch points from teachers. Not strong encouragement, not strong directive about how to improve their work. None of that kind of stuff occurred. What's sad is that Robert Rosenthal came back in and said it was all made up. The assessment was made up. Like, there was no real way to gauge whether they would advance in test scores. There was no way to do it. We literally took the kids in the class and we just randomly put them in an order. We have no idea what their IQs were. We have no idea what their potential growth was. We have no clue. We literally just randomized the list. And then we put markers on it to say, yeah, these kids will increase and these kids won't. Think about that for just a second. Reflect on that. Whoa, you're telling me that it really isn't about anything other than the inputs that I put around somebody. What I did, what I viewed someone as, and the input I gave because of that. It's an important story because high purpose organizations don't just have a high purpose view of what they do or who they are. They have a high purpose view of their people. They believe that every single person on their team has the potential to grow, the potential to develop, that nobody is that kid that only can go up 1 point on the test score, that everybody is the kid who can exponentially advance in test score. So high purpose can't just be about our organization. It has to be about the people inside the organization and the belief that there can be advancement. That concept. So we'll go back to the question that I asked. What's your why that you can connect to for a wellness strategy, for your wellness culture? Maybe it's your mission. Maybe there's something in your actual mission statement that you can hook to and say, you know what? We can build our wellness culture on top of this concept. Maybe whether they're named or unnamed, are there things that you all just hold together? You believe these things, and consequently, you can build wellness on top of that. What about operating principles? Maybe there's just some operating principles that you hold inside your organization. We have some operating principles inside our organization that we can easily put a culture of wellness on top of. One of our operating principles is that when we take time off, we take time off, right? We cover each other. If tasks need to get done, our partners will cover for us because we don't want people to have to be working while they're not supposed to be working. It's an operating principle. Does it likely stem from some sort of core value or belief? Yeah, it absolutely does. Because we believe that leaders should live and lead well. And we believe organizations can fulfill their purpose when that's true. So it stems from that, but it's a basic operating principle. So maybe you have something like that. Maybe it's just about desired result, right? I said you would probably learn a little more about me than you wanted to in the context of this presentation. I'm all about getting a result. Every personality assessment or inventory that you can do on me says that I'm a hard driver who wants to get stuff done. And here's the science, the research, the science, everything indicates that cultures of wellness get better results, business results, performance results. So maybe there is a belief inside your organization that results matter. And if it's true, perhaps you can build culture of wellness on that. Find a place to put the culture. It gets real easy to be like, well, if it's not from our mission, then it's not good enough. No, if it's the basics of everybody is super about results, then by God, build the culture on top of that, right? Like use that. This is not about judgment. This is not about value of what priority should be able to support the culture. This is about the recognition that if we're going to have a culture of wellness, it's not because we're going to walk in tomorrow and go, guess what? Just spent a great 3 hours and then some more in the afternoon on this wellness thing. And we just need to be all about wellness now. That's not going to be what works, right? You guys have seen it not work. Have you seen somebody in your organization pop in with some brand new thing like, hey, we're going to do this now. Declare we're going to be something that isn't supported by who we already are in some way or form. And so now I invite you to think again and let's talk about it. What's in that mental Rolodex of things that could be mission, could be values, could be operating principles, could be results, could be shared personal values that inside your organization, you can use it as a foundation to support wellness. So here's the critical point from my seat. Trying to come in and introduce new programming or new activities that do not have some foundation in what's already part of your culture and already honored as part of your culture is likely to result in failure. It may not be an immediate failure. It may be something that you can sustain for a few months, but it's likely to be harder to try to sustain it in that period of time. More energy, you're likely to be more frustrated. You're likely to be more disappointed in the results. And ultimately, you're likely to look back and say, that didn't stick. And so being able to truly identify, where can I embed this? Where can I take this and lay it on top of a foundation that already exists is much more likely to help you have the culture, the programs, the activities, the strategies be successful. That's the most critical point. And again, I think experientially, we've all seen that. We've all seen the grand idea that didn't change a thing. And it was because it really wasn't connected to something that we already hold to be true. And so if we can make that tie, we'll ultimately be more successful. And by the way, that's not just our experiential belief. Research indicates it as well. So there's real data behind that conceptual framework. But sometimes it's more about us knowing we've experienced it, right? Like data can say all kinds of stuff. When we know we've experienced it is maybe when we get a little more driver. So we'll move to the second concept then that Coyle brings to our attention through his research. Cultures that are successful have built safety inside their team, inside the organization, inside that culture. Two very simple examples that Coyle mentions, or the ones that we'll highlight from Coyle's work, are about being wired for belonging. So Wipro is one of those. Does anybody know what Wipro is? I don't want to assume that you don't. All right. Wipro is one of those agencies that does like telephone calls, like the ones we avoid. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like the telemarketer calls, the ones that we hope our phone tells us this is potential spam or something so we don't have to answer it, those calls. That's part of what Wipro does. They're like a customer service type of thing, and telemarketing type of thing. They were having significant employee retention issues. That makes sense, huh? Right? Like nobody really wants to work in one of those places necessarily. You don't want to get yelled at. You don't want to have every call you get hung up on. Like that's just not a really healthy thing for most people, right? That doesn't feel good. And so it's not like that's a great place to work necessarily, at least not the work itself. So Wipro was like, you know what? We got to do something about that. Like our work itself isn't fun for most people. So we got to do something to make people feel like they should stick with us. So they did a really interesting little test where they took their orientation process and they made two changes to it. Number one, they changed the way that they did like the first hour or two of introduction to the company. And what they did was they took it from being Wipro-centric to being new employee-centric. And here's what I mean by that. When you get oriented to a lot of companies, doesn't it go something like this? And welcome to Ethos Leadership Group. And let me tell you about our mission. And let me tell you about our vision. And let me tell you about our clients. And it's like on and on and on about the company and very little about, hey, what made you want to be here? What do you bring to the table? Like, how do you see yourself growing inside our organization? Like those aren't typically the conversations that we have in orientation. And so they changed that. The other thing they changed, really simple, really crazy. They would give t-shirts, right? Like, way, yay, you're one of us now, you get a t-shirt. They altered one thing about the t-shirt. They started putting people's names on it. So they tested, because all good research has to be tested, right? Like we can't just anecdotally think this. They went ahead and continued their normal orientation process, the normal blah, blah, blah process. with one group. And with the other group, they started the new process, which did go into, hey, what brought you to Wipro? What do you see yourself bringing to our experience? What do you see yourself bringing to our consumers? What do you see yourself bringing to our team? We want to hear about that. We're excited about that. And they literally just flipped that on its head. And then they gave the t-shirt with a name. That was it. In the group that got revised orientation with the t-shirt with a name, they were 250% more likely to be retained than the first group that got boring orientation and a t-shirt, but without a name. 250%. So put yourselves in the shoes of Wipro orientation participants. What's different? What's different? Story. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Greg Popovich. He is the head coach of an NBA basketball team in San Antonio, the San Antonio Spurs. So one of the things that I find very interesting is that they have data analytics that predict the number of games coaches should be able to win with the teams that they have. They do the data analytics and predictions around all kinds of stuff. Like if a team has whatever players that they've got, whether they were fresh out of college or they've been in the NBA for some period of time, they look at like scoring histories and trends and all that kind of stuff. They just take all this data and put it into a computer and crunch it. And what they ultimately can spin out of that is a projection of games that should be won with that particular team on the floor. And they put in all kinds of factors like, not all of your starters can't always be the ones playing. They have to rest for a few minutes. So then they add in the bench players and they project the number of minutes they're going to be on the floor and all this other kind of stuff. And they will literally go through an entire season and project how many games a team should win. Well, they did that with all the NBA teams over the course of a few years. And there was only one team that dramatically overshot the prediction. And it was Greg Popovich's team, the San Antonio Spurs. Over the course of their study period, they won 117 more games than they were projected to win on the basis of data. 117 more games. Now, if you're not an NBA fan, that may not necessarily register a whole lot of information for you. Here's what it means in detail over the course of a 3 or 4 year cycle. It means that they're winning somewhere between 20 and 30 extra games a season. 20 and 30 extra games a season boils down to NBA playoffs, maybe even NBA championship, which Greg Popovich and the San Antonio Spurs have won multiple of. So you're talking about the difference between a team that gets their desired result and a team that might not quite hit that mark, because every NBA team wants to win the NBA championship, right? That's the goal. That's the desired result. So because of that data analytics study, Coyle decided we better figure out what the San Antonio Spurs are doing. Like, what is different about the San Antonio Spurs? So they went and embedded themselves with the San Antonio Spurs. And they found several key things going on. Number one, Greg Popovich, their coach, knew everything that mattered to every single player on his team. He knew everything that mattered. He knew their families. He knew their girlfriends. He knew their favorite wines. He knew their favorite vacation spots. He knew everything that was critical from an experiential piece with them. And he knew something more. He knew every personal value they held and how it projected itself in their behavior as a teammate and how it projected itself in their behavior as a community member. He knew all that stuff. And because he knew all that stuff, he was able to every single day personalize the experience of his team, every team member, every teammate, every single day. He could go in and say to a Tony Parker, hey, when you get back to the locker room, you're going to find a gift It's a new wine I want you to try. It's similar in taste to the wine that I know you love. It's just an alternative. I just want you to take a shot at it. Let me know what you think, right? Like little things, all driven by his knowledge of those people, those individuals. When they asked Popovich about it, like, how do you do all this? And why do you do all this? He said, well, I mean, first of all, it's just what you do, right? Like they're your team. So he seemed kind of startled, like it's just what you do, they're your team. But he said, I believe, I guess, that like players who are motivated and feel good in all parts of their life make better teammates. And I think better teams are going to win. Like, I guess at the end of the day, that's really what's going on. They're going to win. I believe that's true. But I got to have my people being able to be whole for them to be able to be the best teammate they can be, so that then the team can be the best it can be. I guess if that's the continuum you want to look at. When they interviewed Spurs players, they all said the same stuff. They're like, we don't know how he does it, but somehow he seems to know all this stuff, right? So it's not like he sat and said, I'm going to have everybody come in and we're going to conduct these interviews, or I want everybody to fill out this form. He didn't do any of that. Like they're like, we don't know how he knows all this, but he knows all the stuff we care about. And every single player talked about it. And of course, talked to Popovich, it all just happened in casual conversation, right? Like he's just making mental notes, reflecting, checking, knowing what's going on for his team, for his people, listening very well. So it didn't seem forced. It seemed just genuine, part of who he is and his care for people. They all ultimately told the same story, reflecting their belief that this is like the culmination of what Popovich does. San Antonio Spurs were playing the Miami Heat. They had already won 3 games, and in the fourth quarter, they had a double-digit lead. So game 4 would have won, would have given them the NBA championship. They fell apart on the floor. Miami made a heated comeback. They won that game, which was game 6. So the Spurs are supposed to be celebrating. Now they're tight. They've got 1 game. It's going to be 1 game that's going to make all the difference. Because they had a 10-point lead, everybody's super disappointed. People are coming to Popovich. He's trying to do the interviews. I mean, you know how that goes, right? They get interviewed by the press and coach isn't happy and he's trying to get through all that. He makes sure that the location that they were going to go to celebrate remains on reserve. He makes sure that every team member and every family member who was going to go join in the celebration knows that there will still be an event after the media is done. And not only does he do that, he makes sure he is the first person at the location, so that when people get out of their cars or get off the bus, he can stand at the front door, shake their hand, and say something like this: hey guys, tonight's still about celebrating us. That's what we were doing in the first place. That was the plan. Yeah, it would have been about celebrating a championship, but it's not about that. It was always about celebrating us, who we are, our families, our team, what we mean to each other. That's what this night was always going to be about anyway. So guess what? We're still going to do it because we are still who we are. We'll worry about game 7 tomorrow, but tonight we celebrate us. We celebrate who we are. We celebrate everything about us that makes us different. That's safety. It's safety because it says every element of what we are and who we are is cohesive and holistic. Here's the challenge for some of our organizations. When we talk about wellness and safety, and even just when we talk about wellness, a lot of times we talk about wellness in only a few of the categories. There are actually multiple dimensions of wellness. We have a tendency to think only about physical wellness. Marion had said, somebody said, is this a weight loss program? Right? Like And some of us may go a little further and we may say, oh, no, it's about emotional wellness too, and spiritual wellness. But there's actually even more to wellness and a true wellness culture than that. And I'm not going to try to be the expert here. There's somebody else that's going to be the wellness expert on this call, and that's Susan. I am going to say this. If our organizations do not honor every dimension of wellness, what it creates is a place that's not safe. But we have to consider the things inside of our organization that when we come in and say, hey, wellness matters, and we highlight 2 or 3 categories, are there other categories that people don't feel like wellness matters? And what kind of disruption does that create to their safety? Because people who do not feel psychologically safe will not participate in activities that we want them to participate in, right? That was one of the things that I thought was really interesting in some of your responses about what concerns you. We had several people talk about, well, employee motivation and involvement. How do we get them engaged? How do we get them motivated to do this? We had people talking about how do we get people to dedicate time to this, right? Those are concerns. Well, I think the bigger concern is there anything inside our culture that would actually detract from their feelings of safety? Because Greg Popovich could have absolutely decimated everything he had built if after game 6, he sat in the locker room and said, you know what, you guys, we were going to go celebrate an NBA championship tonight. Well, that's not happening now because you guys blew a 4th quarter lead. And everything he had done to build safety before that would have completely been undermined in the moment. And so again, I'm going to ask us to be a little transparent and a little bit vulnerable. If you look at that category, dimensions of wellness, are there any dimensions that you're going to have to work on intentionally inside the culture to be able to get some of the other dimensions to feel safe? All right, so we'll move to the third element that we'll talk about today, which is shared vulnerability. So in the work that Coyle did and his research team did inside of organizations, they ultimately found that every organization that was that high performing, get good, high results, building the cultures that they wanted to build on top of foundation, they all had this vulnerability that was shared, a shared vulnerability. And it was in all sorts of ways. In that crime syndicate ring that I had mentioned earlier, which we haven't talked about yet, that's pretty high level of shared vulnerability, right? Because all it takes is one person in the group getting angry and calling and ratting somebody out, and then they get to turn state's witness, because that's how that works. And everybody else goes to jail, right? And so talk about a high level of shared vulnerability. They were sharing vulnerability in regard to freedom, like literally in regard to freedom. And so it ranged from things that were that significant and things as significant as like military and what that means to be in the military and having shared vulnerability, down to the things that we experience every day. We're in our workplaces and maybe it doesn't feel good to admit we've made a mistake, but inside those cultures that were performing at the highest level, they were able to admit those kinds of things. They were having that type of shared vulnerability. So the couple of examples that I'd really like to kind of hone in on from Coyle's research and the work of his team is actually from that military context, but 2 very different reasons for it. The first is log PT. So let me just check this. Did anyone serve in the military and have to do log PT? Anybody had that personal experience? Okay. Anybody have family members who served in the military who had to do things like log PT? Maybe they were in special forces or, you know, any of that kind of stuff. Amy, you did. Okay. Very cool. So maybe a little bit of thought. If you're trying to picture log PT, just get this image in your mind. You've seen it somewhere. It's the group of men and women who literally have like this massive log that weighs like however many pounds, and they're lifting it on the beach. Have you seen those kind of images before? Like on the beach and they're having to do maneuvers. Log PT isn't really about the physical side of their work. Log PT, when you talk to individuals that are in the military, and which Coyle and his team had the opportunity to do, it's really about developing trust. Because at some point, your hand is going to slip off the log. And you're going to feel in front of you and behind you the movements and adjustments that somebody else makes to steady the log when your hand fell off, or when your muscles got tired and you couldn't lift with the exertion that you were able to before. Because they don't do log PT with like people 5 feet apart. They're not socially distanced. They are right next to each other, bodies right on top of one another. And so you can feel every movement. You can feel every slip. You can feel every adjustment that gets made. And so what they're really teaching in that moment is that it's vulnerability that leads to trust. That's how you learn trust. Now, here's the critical part of that from a military exercise perspective. And I think we can probably envision this. In military exercises, especially like when you think about special forces exercises, for instance, if we're all on a team and we're supposed to be going into a space, you are assigned to look left and I am assigned to look right. And if I look left or you look right, it is quite possible that we will get each other killed. Somebody is assigned a specific way to move. And if they don't move that way, it is quite likely somebody's going to get hurt. So log PT is ultimately designed to help me feel confident that this team of people I'm working with will do what they're supposed to do when I can't. That's ultimately what and it's designed to teach me to do what I'm supposed to do when somebody else can't. That's all log PT is about. That's its whole design, is ultimately to create trust inside of a team. I picture it like this because I'm an old Indiana Jones fan. Anybody else love the Indiana Jones movies? I love those movies. Those are like the best things ever. First of all, I love Harrison Ford. But my favorite of all time Indiana Jones movie is Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, because not only do you get Harrison Ford, you get Sean Connery, and there is nothing better than that, in my opinion, right? Like, wow, that's a great combination. So I love that movie. And in that movie, there's a crucial scene where Harrison Ford's got this journal. Sean Connery's character, his father, has been shot. He's got this journal, and he's got to be able to make it to Christ's cup, because if he can dip the water in that cup, he can come back and save his dad. Remember that scene? So he's trying to go through these things, these tests that he has to navigate. And one of them is walking across a cavern. Remember that? He's standing at the edge of this cavern and he can see the other side, but there's no path. But the journal indicates there is a path, but he can't see the path. So he does deep breath. Remember, he holds his arms out like this. He lifts up one leg and closes his eyes and just falls forward. And when he does that, a path becomes clear. It opens. The path is there. He just couldn't see the path. The reason shared vulnerability is so important is because we have a tendency to think that trust is earned, but trust actually materializes when we're vulnerable. It doesn't get created in reverse. It doesn't happen that, well, somebody proves we can trust them and then we're vulnerable. It's not how it works. Trust materializes when vulnerability is shared. And that's the concept of the vulnerability loop. when we will leap into the unknown, like Indiana Jones did in that movie, then trust will actually materialize for us. And that's what Log PT teaches. Then to ensure that the military in particular, that they follow up with that, they do these things called after action reviews. So after they've gone on an exercise, they will come back and they break down the exercise, every single element of it, with this analysis. What went like it was supposed to and what didn't go like it was supposed to, right? There is no blame. There is no finger pointing. There is no saying, well, Becky's the one who screwed up that part. There's none of that. It's literally just an objective analysis of every step, what factually happened. And that's it. Like, just what happened? Did it go the way we planned? Did everything happen the way we wanted it to move? No blame, no attempting to shame people, no attempting to do any of that. And so those after action reviews are critical for the team because they help them thinking about future plans, right? If they've done 2 exercises in a row and it broke down at the same point every time, then they know they need to do some better preparation, better training around that point. Or maybe that strategy is a really bad strategy. Maybe it's just not working, but they have the vulnerability to get into those conversations and acknowledge this is what factually occurred. It did or didn't match our plan. And from there, they're willing to make shifts because being vulnerable in that way creates trust. And then trust just continues to grow and extend and grow and extend. So when you think about that for your organization, love this slide, because the guy's getting married, right? Ring on his finger, and he's got his fingers crossed behind his back, which presumably his bride can't see. When our talk doesn't match our walk inside of an organization, we erode trust. We erode everything inside of an organization. When someone says, out of vulnerability, because they are being transparent and vulnerable, they're not just sharing a thought, they're sharing the emotion behind the thought, because that's the difference between transparency versus vulnerability. Transparency, I'm willing to speak the thing. Vulnerability, I'm willing to speak the emotions behind the thing. So when they bring that to us and they say, I am exhausted. We have done X number of service clients in the past 5 days that have had these awful traumatic experiences, and I just can't handle it anymore. And we say, we just got one more interview today. One more interview and then you'll be done. What are we really doing? Because the vulnerability loop says that when I share vulnerability, if you match my vulnerability, we close the loop, and that's what creates trust. But if I share my vulnerability and you don't, if you don't close the loop, we don't get trust. The loop has to close. Somebody in Log PT has to steady the log. That has to occur, or we don't get the trust that we want to have materialized. So, and again, this is an invitation to legitimate vulnerability, not just transparency, but vulnerability. Is there anything in your organization right now that you're like, whoo, man, we talk a good game, but we don't necessarily walk a good game? You have any of those moments? We've identified a few things. These don't even have to be like as complex as the prior discussion. These can be little things. It can be simple things. It can be the difference between me saying I care about our team having time off and honoring that time off, and then sending an email at 7 o'clock at night, right? They don't have to be huge things. It can be simple things. And especially if the next morning I go, hey, David, I sent you an email last night. Did you not see that? Right? Like, it doesn't have to be those huge categories we talked about before. So are there any walk the walk challenges inside that may undermine that vulnerability that's going to have to be shared. Because here's the bottom line. People shy away from vulnerability, and the concept of wellness makes us have to admit vulnerability. If we're really going to talk about wellness at the depth and core of what it is, we have to be vulnerable. But if we have walk the walk problems, people aren't likely to be vulnerable about that topic. So, little things. What could be a problem? Thoughts. David and I have this conversation quite a bit because we will, we think about, we're trying to help our clients be well. And are there any behaviors that we're doing that set a bad example, right? Like we'll have that discussion. So I am bad about answering an email on Saturday or Sunday, and I don't get that perfect. I still do. But because I feel this tension, I really need to respond to my client. And if they've written me, they need an answer, right? Like I feel that, but then I'm like, but that's a really bad example, Becky, because you should be saying you shouldn't be working on Saturday, right? But then I don't know the individual circumstance. And so I feel that tension a lot of how do we honor what we would want them to honor in a way that's a good example for them. And I will admit, I don't always do that right. I fail on that, but it's the kind of thing that we're talking about. Where does our talk not match our walk? We can go in and teach all kinds of stuff, but if they see our behavior not match what we teach, they're not really going to embrace, and it's understandable. Any others, as we've kind of continued to unpack, any other examples that you look at inside your organization and say, it's a little thing, but it could actually undermine what we're trying to do? All right. Even that conversation. What about vending machines? We had a client that was initiating some wellness culture activities inside their organization, and one of the first things they did was a review of the physical spaces and contexts that did not support that. And they found in almost every one of their locations vending machines that had Coke and snacks that weren't healthy. And so they literally ended their vending contract because they're like, how are we supposed to promote wellness when we've got vending machines that we're driving people to, right? Like it just doesn't make sense. And they did all kinds of other things. They substituted the kinds of snacks that they would have at meetings and all that kind of stuff. But they literally just did a physical review and said, our environment doesn't support wellness. It's some sort of action step. And so our business partner, James, in his wisdom, came up with this concept. If we're going to act, if we're going to have time for action, then we probably need to apply something. We probably need to change something or think about changing something. And we probably need to teach something. So I'm curious, in this discussion today, what's something that you'll take away and you say, you know what, we can apply this. I can do it in my own personal work, my own little segment of our organization. Maybe even I think I can get our entire organization to adopt and apply this concept. Is there anything that you've identified that you would maybe want to take out and apply? You want to maybe kind of try to get the organization to apply? Doesn't have to be huge concepts. It can be little actions, little steps. All right, let's shift to change. A lot of times we're doing things individually or in an organization that don't necessarily match what we believe in philosophy, right? It just happens. We're human. We make mistakes. We don't always align. Our values don't always align with our behaviors. We want them to, but that doesn't always happen. So is there anything that you're taking away from our discussion today that you say, you know what, I might need to change this approach? If we're really going to build the culture that we want of wellness inside the organization, I personally need to change this. Maybe our organization needs to change this. Anything that you've heard that's a change question for you? All right, let's shift to the last question. What would you teach? So hopefully there's something that you've heard today that you say, you know what, I need to share this concept with somebody. Like maybe it's not necessarily because you look at that person and go, they need it. Maybe it's because I'm so excited about this concept. I just need to tell somebody else. Like I need to teach it because I'm pumped about it. And I feel like if I teach it, it will help embed it in me a little bit more. So does anybody have a teach that they are walking away with? Like, I got to teach this. This is cool. I want to say thank you for your commitment. Twofold, actually. Number one, for your commitment to the concept of wellness and what that means. And also to your organization, that secondfold commitment. You've made a commitment to your organization to be here and to be part of this and to become the champion for this activity inside your organization. And those commitments should be honored. So thank you for that. Thank you for being willing to make those commitments to the topic and to your organization and bringing that to the table. I really appreciate all your sharing today. From my seat as a content presenter, it makes it so much more enjoyable when I get people like you who participate and share and make my job easy. So as a personal thank you, thanks for making my job easy this morning. I really appreciate you doing that. Amy?
Well, Becky, we want to thank you. Everybody's welcome to unmute. And I still think a round of applause is appropriate at times like this. So let's all give Becky a hand. That's right. We're allowed to blow kisses too. Anything you feel. Give her a virtual hug. Thank you. Thank you so much, Becky. Yes, and thank